The government has proposed a principle-based fiscal anchor, which will be detailed in the midterm budget policy statement later this year. It argues that while the primary budget surplus has become an acceptable way of anchoring fiscal expectations, an official anchor will be legally binding and incumbent on every incoming government administration.
The question refers to whether there are infections or anything. The answer is no. The second point I want to make is that in the speech, we're making it absolutely clear that we're in a process of consultation, both with Cabinet, Parliament, and the public at large. You will recall that the team published a document on fiscal anchors. And we're going to take the outcome of that to Parliament, once finished with Parliament and consultation, and have Cabinet final decision on it. Precisely because it's going to require some legislative changes, that's why we'll have to start with Parliament so that we have a sense whether there's a possibility of those legislative changes. For now, that's why we're not making any pronouncement. We're just signaling that this discussion is taking place. The final pronouncements after consultation will come up in the medium-term budget policy statement in October.
The National Treasury argues that the upward revision to the peak of debt to 78.9% comes as a result of increased borrowing this year amid favorable market conditions and the nominal GDP effects of the lower inflation target.
So domestically, we borrowed more than we anticipated because of favorable market rates. It's also important to add that over the medium term, we do have a heavier than usual redemption profile. And so when we have an opportunity to borrow a little bit more and keep slightly higher cash balances in order to navigate the tricky redemption profile, we also take advantage of that. Importantly, to end this point is that even though we are borrowing more, over the medium term, our gross borrowing requirement is still lower.
Government has achieved a tax revenue overrun, mainly supported by higher net value-added tax, corporate income tax, and dividend tax revenue collections.
The 2026 budget proposes the first tax relief for inflation since 2023-2024, and I thought you would clap your hands for this. Revenue collections for 2025-2026 are projected to be 21.3 billion, higher than forecast in the 2025 budget, and this is led by higher than expected net VAT and corporate income tax collections. Higher precious metals prices have contributed to revenue performance and the outlook, but we need to emphasize that the gains are not expected to approach those generated by more broad-based 2021-2022 commodities boom.
The country's budget deficit has narrowed from 4.8% announced in the 2025 budget to 4.5% in the current fiscal year. The primary budget surplus is expected to reach 0.9% of GDP. Economists have welcomed the budget announcements.
Look, it's a good budget. If you look in terms of the economic projections, they show an economy that it continues to recover, reaching 2% by 2028. From an inflation perspective, inflation is well contained, closer to 3% again by 2028. If you look in terms of the fiscal matrices, the debt to GDP ratio, it peaks. Even though it peaks at a slightly higher number, it continues to decline over the next decade. If you look at the fiscal deficit, it again moderates, which means it's becoming smaller, even though it's becoming smaller at a slower pace relative to what we're expecting. But if you look in terms of what was provided in terms of tax relief, There is no personal income tax increase. There's full adjustment for fiscal drag, which means you are not going to be impacted by the influence of inflation. You are going to be adjusted so that you remain in the appropriate tax bracket. There's also support for small businesses, which means overall it's supportive of the consumer, supportive of small businesses. That's really quite supportive for economic growth. If you look in terms of infrastructure spending, 1 trillion is going to be spent over the next 3 years in infrastructure. The big beneficiaries is energy, it's logistics, it's also municipal infrastructure. All of those are supportive of what the president highlighted in the State of the Nation address, which means we should see economic growth start to pick up over the next couple of years.
South Africans can breathe a sigh of relief following government's decision to withdraw last year's proposed 20 billion rand tax increase. Instead, taxpayers can expect some relief as personal income tax brackets and medical tax credits will be fully adjusted for inflation for the first time in 2 years. I'm Naledi Mabitsela Ngcobo in Cape Town.